Let's get right to it. Again, I'm going to pass it off to Bob sooner rather than later. He's just coming off a really impressive year of racing with his team Tecnu. They finished second at Expedition Africa and finished the year off with a third place finish at the World Championships in Costa Rica. So without further ado, Mr. Bob Miller.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. All right. Thanks for the introduction, Pete. And yeah, that was a pretty cool video there at the beginning you guys showed. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the Expedition Adventure Racing World Championships that took place in Costa Rica just this past December. And as they mentioned, I was racing with Team Tecnu down there. It's a team based out of the United States. I joined them a couple years ago, and we've been racing together for the past few years. But first, I thought I'd maybe bring some of you up to speed on what Expedition Adventure Racing is. Basically, it's a team sport. It's multidiscipline. You know, we're competing in mountain biking, trail running, kayaking, any kind of non-motorized sport goes in an adventure race. And we're racing over multiple days, so 3 to 10 days the races can last, and you're kind of left on your own. You're with your team, and you have to stay together the whole time. Teams are also co-ed. There's guys and girls on the same team, so that's another neat dynamic to the sport. And you also have to navigate through the race course on your own. So you have maps, and they give you maps before the race, and you kind of navigate through a series of checkpoints throughout the race course to get there. So I'll show you some more pictures of from some races we'd done. That first one was us in Ecuador a couple years ago. This is the start of a race in Utah. They started us all on horses, so again, non-motorized. It was chaos at the start of that race. The horses were kind of running everywhere. People got run over. It was pretty crazy. Here we are racing in the Rockies. This was in the Kootenays. There was a race out there a few years ago. So this is a team obviously climbing up to a big pass. Rope work comes into play. You might have to ascend a cliff or rappel off a cliff or do a big zip line. It's kind of a fun element to the racing, and it looks good on camera and in pictures and things like that. So this was in Mexico, actually. This was a race down in Mexico. This was a team I used to race with. It was called Supplier Pipeline. This was a team based in Canada. They were from Waterloo, the company, and I actually owe a lot to this team. I gained a lot of experience racing on this team based out of Canada. So this was us at a race called Primal Quest in Utah. Those are some of my older teammates. Anyone care to guess where this was taken? It's in Canada. Newfoundland. Yeah, right on. Yeah, this was Newfoundland. So actually the 2004 Adventure Racing World Championships took place in Newfoundland, believe it or not. So this is climbing not far away from Corner Brook, actually, where this was. So we were racing in an event out there, and yeah, someone knows this one? Yeah, Bill was there. Well, that's another story. Bill, you can tell that afterwards maybe, right? So this was a race called Eco Challenge that used to happen. This was in Fiji, so we were kayaking through some gorges and things like that. It's an old teammate of mine, Ted Jennings. That was fun. So yeah, but we're here to talk about Costa Rica and the Adventure Racing World Championships that took place in December. So this was the team I was racing with. We actually had a really good team. As you can imagine, as in any sport, building a team is one of the hardest things to do. And in a sport where you're together, 6-7 days in a row, and you have to be with each other the entire time, you can imagine you want to be there with people that you can handle. So I met Kyle a couple years ago. This is I think I got a pointer here. There's Kyle. Kyle's on the right here, and he'd been kind of a part of this Team Tecnu out of the United States for a few years, and he was looking to kind of build the team up and make it a bit stronger. And for those who don't know, Tecnu is it's a poison ivy scrub. People always ask, what's Tecnu, what's that? So the team is actually based in California, and they have a real problem with poison oak out there. So they're the sponsor of the team. So So Kyle got in touch with me a few years ago, and I thought it was going to be a neat kind of endeavor. They had sponsorship, and I hadn't been sponsored for a few years, so it was nice to get some of the bills paid for doing a sport that you love. So I thought, sure, I'll join the team. But our other teammates this year were Garrett Bean. This is Garrett over here. Garrett's actually pretty new to Expedition Adventure Racing. He's only been racing for about 2 years. And kind of his role on the team, we brought him in to kind of be the workhorse. He's a really strong, fit athlete, a guy similar to Ryan. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He can do a lot of stuff. So we brought him in to be the workhorse. One thing you'll realize as I go through the different slides, organization and preparation is a real key thing in adventure racing. And one thing we struggled with Garrett this year is he was always strong as an ox, but he would tend to forget things, and he'd forget things in transition areas. And it can really impact you in a race. You have to have mandatory gear, and if something's missing, it could cause you to lose time or get time penalties. But we had a good plan in place for the World Champs to work on that, and he actually performed amazing. He did a really good job at the World Champs. And then kind of our other teammate is Karen Lundgren. She's been racing as long as I have. I've probably been racing about 15 years, and she's been racing as long, if not longer. And Karen has a really neat history. She's obviously been very successful in the sport, but she also helped her stepson climb the 7 summits. He was the youngest person to ever do that, a fella named Jordan Romero. And this is them on top of some crazy peak. I forget it. I think it might have been Annapurna or somewhere crazy. But so Karen's experience was off the charts. There kind of wasn't anything she hadn't ever dealt with. So when anything came up, as things will when you're racing for that many days, she was rock solid and kind of kept us on track. So so this is us kind of getting ready for the race. So before any of these races, there's always a series of gear checks and safety checks and pre-race briefings and all these things that happen. So this is us kind of going through our gear before the race, doing the gear check. I checked the other day. I keep a spreadsheet of all the gear we take to a race, and I actually took over 170 pieces of gear down to the race down there. So, and that's everything from paddles to bike parts and bikes and shoes and clothes and everything. So it's just an immense operation. Getting all that stuff down there. And another interesting thing, people are always curious, what do you guys eat in these races? So this is Kyle getting ready before the race. You can see there's a lot of high calorie, maybe not the most healthy food, but we try and mix that with some protein rich things. And I'll drink weight gain drinks out there, like weight gain powders, just anything to get a lot of calories in as much as you can. So this is Kyle getting ready. And then something else people like to ask about with these races, how much do you sleep? And really, you're left kind of up to your own accord. Like each team can decide to sleep as much as they want throughout the course of the race. And the race might last anywhere from 5 to 10 days. So people are always curious, well, how much sleep can you get by on? And we're trying to figure that out as well. No one's really sure what the optimal amount is, but we knew this was going to be a longer race, at up to 6 days at least. So we'd planned for trying to get 3 hours of sleep per night was kind of our goal. But no one sleeps the first night, so you kind of push through the first night and then try and get 3 hours of sleep for the rest of the way. So that was our plan going into the race. This was a nice touch of the organizers before the race at the pre-race briefing. They brought in a bunch of snakes that we might see on the course. Just to instill a little bit more fear if we weren't fearful already. I think this is a palm viper, a very poisonous snake they showed. They had about 4 snakes set up in the briefing room, and then they were nice enough to bring a doctor in and explain all the different things that were going to go wrong if we did get bitten by a snake during the race. So we knew going down to Costa Rica this could be a problem, so I actually reached out to a friend of mine who's a doctor in Parry Sound, and I know that they deal with snake bites up there with the Massasauga rattler. So I got in touch with him. I was like, what's going to happen if we get bit by a snake? Can we take anti-venom with us? What's the deal? And really, you can't. The anti-venom needs to be refrigerated, and there's nothing you can do. And that was kind of the gist of the presentation they gave us. Beyond scaring everyone, it was basically, if you get bit, get in touch with us as quick as possible, and we got to get you out of there into a hospital kind of thing. So, so it was interesting. Now, There's not only wildlife in Costa Rica, but there's also things in the jungle that can get you, like a lot of the fauna down there isn't very friendly to your body, and it's good that our sponsor was Tecnu. That was kind of nice. We have this nice scrub that'll help us with those ailments. But these are actually my feet from a race I had done about 10 years ago in Fiji. This is jungle foot rot. So I learned the hard way not to neglect your feet in a race like this. And we were doing reasonably well in this race, and me and a couple other teammates got this on our feet, and we ended up having to drop out of the race. It's just an incredibly painful affliction. You know, it's hard to describe it. It's kind of like walking on fire and glass at the same time. It's just incredibly painful. And this was actually 3 or 4 days after I'd dropped out of the race, and I'd been to the hospital, and they treated my feet. So these are looking better, if you can imagine. So I definitely wasn't going to let this happen again in this race. So, and some of the things we did to mitigate that was, treating our feet with antifungal cream as we were going through the race, and we would stop on the course a lot and clean our feet, and make sure that we were looking after ourselves, because that was it's a big issue in expedition adventure racing. If you get a cut or any little scratch, those things can get infected, and if it goes septic, if you don't look after it after a while, you end up out of the race and in the hospital for weeks at a time. So looking after yourself is really key in these races. So again, I wasn't sure if everyone knew kind of what the AR World Championships was. So there's actually a series of 10 events that take place around the world each year. It's called the Adventure Racing World Series, and it culminates in the World Championships every year. Our team was ranked 5th in the world going into the World Championships, but we'd never had a great race at the World Championships. We're always trying to kind of break into the podium and get into the top 3, and these are kind of the top 3 teams that are racing right now. They've kind of separated themselves from, there's about a pack of maybe 5 or 10 other teams that are just trying to get onto the podium. So this is Seagate. They won the race in France the year before in 2012. Thule, another top team, they're based in Sweden, and there's also team members from France and Spain. They won the World Championships in 2011. And then the other top team, there's kind of these 3 teams, is Silva. They've finished on the podium at the World Championships maybe six years in a row, the last 6 years. So super consistent, but they haven't won the race yet, so they're really looking to get a win. So those were kind of our biggest competition, and that was our kind of goal going down to the race was, maybe we can get onto that podium, and that was kind of the ultimate goal for us. So once we got through all the pre-race briefings and the gear checks, we endured it was about a 6-hour bus ride to the start line. This is down on I think it was the Panamanian border is where this race started. So we got on the buses at like 3 in the morning. They drove us down here, and we're all getting ready to go. And the locals put on a really cool little show for us to, give us experience in the local culture, and it was really quite neat getting down there. This is actually an overview of the race course. So the tagline for this race was that it was going to go from border to border and coast to coast. And this is actually kind of almost the whole of Costa Rica, you can see here. And yeah, we started down here, and this orange line shows you the route that the organizers had intended us to take. So to give you an idea, the first leg of the race was a 90-kilometer mountain bike ride, and it finished down here. So that's 90 kilometers right there. And then the whole course was about 850 kilometers. And we would do, all the different disciplines many times. So like there might have been 2 or 3 mountain biking legs, 2 or 3 trekking legs, all spread out along the course. This gives you an idea of the breakdown of how kind of the race went, the lengths of the different legs. And actually, this is a piece of information they gave us before the race started. They didn't give us the maps for the race before it started, but we did get this nice chart that kind of explained, how much time we might expect to spend on each leg, depending if you were a fast or slow team. And what we did is we packed all of our gear into all these gear bins. There was about 6 or 7 gear bins we were allowed to take onto the course, and we had to plan accordingly. Okay, we're going to see this gear bin at this transition area, and we need to put this food in here. And there's just a massive amount of organization that goes into getting all your gear ready just to get to the start line. And that's kind of a tagline of the sport, is that getting to the start line is half the battle. And once you're there, you're like, whew, okay, finally we can start racing. So so this is what we had coming up. here's the start of the race. So we're right on the Panamanian border, and it's always amazes me how fast people run at the start of a race that's going to last 7 days. It's like, what are you guys doing? But it's kind of hard not to get caught up in that. So the race started with a Le Mans start. We had to run about 2 kilometers to a transition area, and this is the transition area where they had all our bike boxes and things set up. So we actually pack our bikes in these boxes at every transition area. So when you get there, you have to kind of build your bike a little bit before you get going. And this is where we got our first set of maps for the race. So here I am, kind of preparing the maps as my team builds the bikes for us. And this is kind of what the maps look like. So they're actually typical of what we might see in Ontario. It's a 1 to 50,000 scale map if you've done any canoeing or camping or tripping. You can see it's a little bit more mountainous down there. There's a lot of contour lines, big hills and valleys. And yeah, away we went, mountain biking for the first leg, and things stayed together pretty much for the top teams. It took about 10 hours for this first ride. There was some nasty sections where we had to do some hike-a-biking. There was some stuff that slowed us down, and we got a little bit of rain as we were going along, so it got a little bit muddy. But all in all, we got through that leg pretty good. Here's some local kids along the way. My fiance Shannon, who's in the crowd, she actually was down following us along the race, and her and some of her friends caught up with these kids. And they were out at I think 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and the kids could just run around, do whatever they wanted. Yeah, it was kind of neat. So the interaction with the local communities is actually one of the things a lot of the racers enjoy in these races. And then this is the end of the first mountain bike ride. So we started the race at 2 in the afternoon. So we're probably around midnight here, 1 in the morning, and teams are starting to come in. And the next leg after that mountain bike ride was about a 65-kilometer kayak. And we were doing okay. I think we came in around 6th place, so we were kind of where we wanted to be. The top 10 teams were kind of spaced out by about an hour, so it was kind of still a close race. It was early days in expedition adventure racing, and this is us getting ready to paddle. This map here shows you, so that transition area is down in the bottom here, so this T1 is where that transition area was, and we had a little bit of a river paddle to get out to, this is actually a big bay off of the Pacific Ocean. When we were going through there, it was really foggy, so it was really hard to actually keep your boat straight in the river. We ended up kind of bouncing off, one side of the river to the other side just because the fog was so thick. I was really using my compass, and if we'd get lucky every now and again, we could see a team set of lights ahead of us, and that was the easiest thing because we could see them kind of glowing in the fog, and we could keep track on that. But it was actually pretty tricky. And then this first checkpoint, number 7, was a little bit hard to find. It's actually on a little channel that goes inside behind this spit of land here, and it spits you out into this other bay. So finding the entrance to that channel was difficult as well. So I was really focused on the maps when we were coming around here. And really what I was trying to do, I was just watching my compass, and when it started to turn a lot further north, I knew we were going to be getting close. And then there was actually a tiny little island right there that we passed, and we could make it out in the dark, and that kind of led us into the channel. One of the teams that was ahead of us, we saw them kind of paddling off out into here, so we were like, oh, cool, we passed the team. It was great, they missed the turn kind of thing. So, and that's what a lot of the adventure racing is, there's a lot of navigation plays a big part in it. So by the time we got past checkpoint 8 and we kind of came back out this way into there's a larger bay that we had to paddle up for about another 40 kilometers. The sun was coming up, so we were getting into the second day of the race. And this gives you an idea of kind of what we were paddling alongside. It was just a massive jungle beside, this ocean. And we didn't see too much wildlife, but we could hear the howler monkeys and all sorts of weird things in the jungle kind of going off, so it was pretty cool. And here we are paddling in towards the end of the leg. We ended up with 2 other teams on this leg, Team Colombia and Team Quasar Lantra. Colombia is from Spain and Quasar Lantra was from Brazil. And kind of the 3 of us were in about 4th, 5th, and 6th place. And those 3 teams I mentioned earlier in the presentation, Silva, Thule, and Seagate, they had gotten ahead by about an hour over we were in a chase pack at this point. So we were trying to catch up to them. This is Karen getting a little bit of help out of the boat. We'd been sitting in the boats for about 12 hours at this point, so it was pretty tough to get your legs back under you and get going again. So after the kayak, we had it was about a 30-kilometer trek. It was on pretty nice roads and some nice countrysides, but it was really, really hot. And we actually had to carry a lot of our paddling equipment with us, so you're probably wondering what this thing is sticking out of Garrett's pack, and that was our pump to pump up the inflatable kayaks for the race. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff we've got strapped to our backs, and Kyle's carrying, this is actually a sail that pops up and it'll inflate really quickly if we get the wind behind us, so we can get assistance from the wind. And these are all our cushions for our butts that got incredibly sore sitting in these boats. So this is kind of all the stuff we were carrying. So it was a tough leg because we had to carry a lot of stuff, and it was really hot. So here we are kind of suffering in the heat. I'm thinking about this now, and I'm looking outside and I'm like, oh, it might not be too bad. Get some of that heat back. And yeah, this is kind of what we were doing to deal with the heat. If you come across water at any time, you just jump in and soak yourself and douse yourselves and just try and cool off. A neat thing we saw on this leg of the race, this was Quasar Launcher, the Brazilian team. We were actually carrying our portage wheels, and they were like, well, forget that. We'll rig up a little trolley here and we'll put all our packs on there, and away they ran with pulling their stuff on the ground. We saw a couple teams do this, and I guess we weren't too bright at that point, but yeah, we got through it okay. So we knew we were going to have to portage boats in this race, and this is us on the next leg. So we finished that trek and we picked up our kayaks again, and we had to actually portage them 10 kilometers to where the put-in was. So we all, do canoeing and canoe tripping around here in Ontario, and a 10-kilometer portage is pretty vicious, but at least it was on a decent road, and this is kind of what we set up. We just had the boats on our portage wheels, and we just kind of pulled them along, and away we went. So the end of this portage kind of brought us into the second night of the race, and as we were going along, we'd gotten ahead of Columbia and Quasar Launcher, who we were with, and we actually caught up to Silva. Well, we didn't really catch up to them. We noticed that their boats were stopped on the side of the road, and they'd stopped for a sleep in one of the cabins, and it was actually something we were looking to do as well. Like I said, you got to manage your own sleep out there in the race course, so we were looking for somewhere to sleep by the end of this leg as well. So at that point, we were kind of down around here. This is the end of that long portage, 13, and then this is where we put in for a big paddle. So we stopped, and Silva was sleeping right around here, and we stopped and slept around here, and at that point we were in third and fourth place in the race, and Thule and Seagate had continued on, and they were paddling somewhere off into the mangrove. So this paddling leg was actually called the Mangrove Monster. You can see we're about to head into this big mangrove swamp, and it's just channels and little alleys and things all over the place, and it was going to be really, really tough with navigation. And to kind of add to the difficulty, there was also 9-foot tides going in and out, ebbing and flowing through the mangroves. So at any time, the water could be rushing in or rushing out. And we had tide charts that helped us kind of plan a little bit. And that was kind of what we were thinking about when we stopped to sleep as well. We were trying to time the tides for certain things. But it wasn't that easy to do on this leg because, if we were paddling here and the tide was coming in, we'd be paddling against the tide. But then when we got here, we'd be with us, and then at this point it might be with us or against us. Because we were kind of zigzagging so much, it was really hard to plan for the tides. So you kind of, at the end of the day, we just had to go and kind of get through it. And when we got up and started paddling again, it was probably around 2 in the morning, so we still had about 4 or 5 hours of darkness, and the navigation was really tricky through here. A lot of teams struggled with navigation through this leg. We got through reasonably unscathed. We had a few times where we spent a couple hours, trying to find the right channel and coming in and coming out. There was actually a few more channels than were shown on this map that are actually out there that weren't shown on the map, so it made things a little bit tricky. And this is kind of the second part of the map. So from where we were there, we had to kind of find our way back up to the checkpoints. And again, the idea is to get the checkpoints in sequential order. So yeah, it was pretty tough. Yeah, who knows which way to go. So we came through checkpoint 15, not bad. And then when we hit this channel here, the tide was really rushing out, and we started paddling up this channel, and it was brutal. We were going like maybe 1 kilometer an hour fighting the tide, so we said forget it. We'd slept 2 hours before we started paddling. We figured we'd stop here and sleep for another hour. It wasn't the best sleep. We were kind of tied up to the side of the mangrove. If anyone's ever seen a mangrove, it's just like massive roots off of these tangled trees. They're just like gnarly and crazy, but we kind of tied up there and tried to sleep. The bugs were not too bad. They were bugging us a little bit, but then the odd thing was little crabs would just drop into the boat randomly. and they would land on you or in the boat, and made sleeping a little bit difficult. So yeah, we stopped there for an hour, and by then the kind of tide had slacked off a little bit, and we were able to make our way back up in towards checkpoint 16. And when we were approaching checkpoint 16, we actually saw Seagate and Silva were paddling away from that checkpoint. So we were going up this channel here, and they were coming out. And we knew this was kind of a funny spot in the race, because from 16 to 17, it looks like it would be nice to follow this channel all the way through here and then get into this channel, and you'd save yourself a lot of time versus paddling all the way around the outside. And so when we saw them paddling back the other way, we were like, oh, well, did they try and get through? Were they not able to make it? Was the channel not passable? We weren't sure. And at this point, the tide was coming in still. Actually, it had turned around. It had started to come back in versus when it was going out here. So we knew the tide had probably risen a little bit from when they were in there. And we decided, okay, well, let's try our luck. We're going to try and get through there. Maybe they didn't even try. Maybe they were taking it conservative. But we paddled in further and trying to get through this channel here. And we actually ran into another team, Team Merrill, who had also been in there. And when we ran into them, they actually told us, yeah, they had been with Seagate and Silva, and they'd all been trying to get through this channel. So it wasn't looking good. But Merrill also told us, they were like, wow, the water's come up. It's like 2-3 feet higher than when we last tried to get through, so maybe it'll be good. And their intention was to continue on and keep trying to get through the channel. So we followed them in for a little bit and ultimately came to a big dead end of mangroves, and it was a real mess. Yeah, it was really nasty. And we kind of climbed up onto the trees and peered through, and we tried to see if we would be able to get through. And, the tide still had to come up maybe another probably 4 or 5 feet from when we were there, and we still weren't sure whether we'd be able to get through or not. And we were looking at our watches, and it was still 3 hours till high tide. So we ended up deciding to play it conservative, just because we were so worried that if it did come up all the way, we still didn't know if we'd be able to get through. So we turned around to leave, and at that point, Team Columbia, another team, showed up. But lucky for them, they hadn't slept in the race yet, and they figured, well, we're going to stop here and sleep. We're going to wait the 3 hours for the tide to come up, and maybe we'll be able to get through. Whereas Merrill and us, we decided to turn around, and we actually paddled all the way around. It took us about 2 hours. And actually, Columbia was able to get through once the tide came up all the way. Yeah, they slept for about 3 hours. The tide came up, and then they got through a little channel. Yeah. Luckily, we didn't see them at the other side, because that would have been that would have been pretty tough. But they were about an hour behind us, but they got all that sleep and they hadn't slept yet. So it was a great strategy call on their part, and great that they were able to get through. So, yeah, I actually was going to talk about some other things that happened on this leg. So there was GPS tracking in these races. We carry devices so people can watch online, and you actually sometimes will have a better idea of where we are than we will when we're out there racing. So these are tracks from a couple teams. The blue line is kind of the intended route the organizers thought we might take, and then the purple line shows Team Thule's route. So they actually had the fastest split on this leg. They went through there. I think it took them about 20 hours to get through the whole leg, so it's still a long time. And then the green line was a team that had a little bit of trouble. You can see they kind of came in and then they went back around, and they were really struggling to navigate in the mangroves. We heard some crazy stories out of this. Some teams got stuck in there for 2 days. They got into an area where the tide had gone out, and they were still kind of stranded in mud, and they had to stay there for like 12 hours before the tide came back in again and they could get going again. Teams had punctures in their boat. They were inflatable boats we were paddling, so we had repair kits with us, but they had to stop for hours and fix their boats. And then my favorite was one team decided to stop like we did, and they tied their boats up to sleep. And the tide was going out when they did this, and when they woke up, they hadn't tied their boats up well enough, and one of them had actually totally disappeared and got dragged out into the ocean, and they had to drop out of the race because they were only down to one boat. So just crazy things can happen. But so we finished this leg. We actually ended up in 4th place by the time we got through to the end of end of this leg. And this gives you an idea of kind of what things look like in the rivers. This wasn't really so much the mangrove, but this was what it looked like in the rivers that we paddled up towards the end of the leg. Really hot terrain. We were putting on sunscreen like every half an hour while we were out there paddling, but it would just like the sweat would take it right off. I had a brutal sunburn after this leg. It was pretty bad. It all blistered up later in the race. But yeah, like I was saying, we got through there pretty good. We ended up in 4th place. Still, those 3 teams were a little bit ahead, Seagate, Silva, and Thule, and we started chasing them. The next leg was a 100-kilometer mountain bike ride. And at the end of this 100-kilometer mountain bike ride, there was actually what they call a mid-camp stop, and there's a mandatory stop of 4 hours in the race. So our goal when we finished this paddle, we were actually coming into the 3rd night of the race. We wanted to try and get through that bike as fast as we could and get to mid-camp so that we could get sleep. And ideally, you want to sleep in the dark because navigation's a lot easier in the daytime. So we were hoping to get there before daybreak. There was some fun stuff. It was a really hilly ride, but there was some fun stuff along the way. Costa Rica is known for its adventure tourism, and partway through this leg, we actually did what they called a Superman zip line. So this was what they had teams go down, and it was crazy. It was like they'd let you go and you'd go over 100 kilometers an hour. It was over 1 kilometer long, this zip line. It was insane. It was pretty wild. Now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we ended up in the dark, so the spatial experience was totally different, but we had our bright headlamps on, and all of a sudden you just see these trees zipping by. It was pretty wild. So that was kind of halfway through the leg. When we finished the zip line, we had to kind of hike back around, and we'd seen Silva when we were getting ready to start. They'd already finished, so we knew they weren't too far ahead. But when we got back to our bikes to start biking again, Silva was still there. And it actually turns out that a member on their team had fallen on the mountain bike, and the girl on her team separated her elbow. And yeah, so they were getting medical attention, and we weren't sure what was going to happen with them, but they ultimately ended up having to drop out of the race because she hurt her elbow too badly to continue. So. Yeah, so this was us kind of trying to get through the next night in the race. This gives you an idea of the landscape that we were going through. So it was pretty hilly and mountainous, beautiful, beautiful stuff. But that night was tough. So like I said, that was the 3rd night of the race, and we really struggled probably around 4 or 5 a.m. I do the navigating for the team, and around that time, I really had trouble focusing on the map. I was, coming to a corner, and usually I'd be like, okay, yeah, we're going right here, or, in 1 kilometer, we're going left, but I would lose focus, and you're not really daydreaming, but your body just wants to sleep so badly, and you're almost shutting down as you're going along. So we slowed down for about an hour or two towards the end of this leg, really struggling to keep going. But when that sun comes up, it's amazing. You get kind of renewed energy, and the sun's up, and you kind of get some more energy to keep going. So we ended up getting through the end of that ride. It was about 11 a.m. But this was something that really neat that we found out about after the race. There was a team there from Calgary called Epic Endurance. And one of their members of their team actually got hit by a motorbike, or it was a vehicle, or he got in an accident during the race. But he luckily was okay. He was fine physically, but his bike was broken in half. Like the down tube of his frame was completely broken, so they actually were able to fix the bike enough so that he could finish the race. So what they've done is they've put a metal piping on the down tube, and they've got C-clamps on there. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff going on here, but amazingly they're able to fix their bike enough to keep going. So it's inspiring to see what some people are able to come up with. So. But yeah, like I said, we got into mid-camp there. It was about 11 o'clock the next day. This isn't our team, but it kind of gives you an idea what mid-camp looks like. You come in, you kind of throw all your gear everywhere, and all you want to do is eat as much as you can, as quick as you can. In this case, we wanted to shower as well because we'd been in the jungle for up to 3 days, and we wanted to get rid of all the yucky stuff that was on us. So we took a shower, and then our kind of plan coming into mid-camp is we're going to do those 2 things: eat, clean up, and then fall asleep kind of as quick as we can. And what we do is we get up an hour before we're supposed to leave the transition area because we find we're a little bit more coherent having gotten that sleep in us, and it helps us pack for the next legs of the race. So after this mid-camp stop, we had one of the really key legs of the race coming up. It was a 100-kilometer trek through the jungle, and we were actually going up high into the mountains at this point. Costa Rica actually has some pretty high mountains, over 3,000 meters high. And that was kind of the next leg of the race. So we really kind of dialed in our gear and got ready to go. And it was really neat, the environments you hiked through as you kind of left mid-camp. You went from this oppressingly hot jungle, and you're slowly climbing and climbing up. And eventually you're kind of in this, like drier, more arid terrain. And this was the first checkpoint on that trek. We were up pretty high, and these are kind of some of the mountains in Costa Rica. So so a really critical leg. I'll kind of set up a little bit that was going to happen later on in the race. So this leg was estimated to take about a day and a half to 2 days. We were leaving at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And the next leg after this was going to be a rafting leg. And for safety reasons, they don't let you raft at night, so they implement what's called a dark zone. And the dark zone was going to start at 3 p.m., doesn't matter which day it was, and it would last till like 5 a.m. the next day. So it was a long duration to be sitting there and not being allowed to continue on the course. So it was going to come into play. Now, we thought leaving at 3 p.m., you know, this trek was going to take a day and a half to 2 days. We thought we would get there in the morning. You know, worst case scenario, if it takes us 2 full days, we'll get there maybe just at the dark zone and we'll be able to continue on. But that was always playing in our minds as we were going through this trekking leg, was that upcoming dark zone. And we were positioned quite well. We left the transition area in 3rd place, and the top 2 teams were within 3 hours. I think the first team was 3 hours ahead, the second place team was 2 hours ahead, and then there was a team that came in just behind us that was only about a half hour behind. So things were looking good at this point. But then we hiked up into the mountains here, and we're up around 3,000, 3,500 feet, and unfortunately, Kyle started to feel the effects from the altitude, is what we think it was. He started getting nauseous. He was dizzy. He had no energy. So kind of right away when that happens, what we do is we move gear around on the team, and we'll take his pack and take all his weight and try and help him along. Sometimes we'll put him on a tow line, actually, is what you can do for your teammate, and you can tow them and help them through the race. So this was us getting to that hut I just showed you on the slide before. And kind of our intention here is we're just going to take a quick power nap. We're going to sleep for 10 minutes, and maybe that'll snap Kyle out of the funk that he was having. And that's kind of what we did, and we got up and we got going again. But unfortunately, he didn't improve, and about an hour later, we were still climbing higher into the mountains, and he was getting worse and worse. So things were starting to not look good for our team, and we weren't sure really what to do. We weren't sure if it was the altitude or if he was just getting sick or kind of what was going on, but we decided to stop and sleep for another hour and a half in hopes that he would get better. So we slept. It wasn't a great sleep. We kind of just slept on the side of the trail, and we got up and we kept going again. Yeah, so Kyle wasn't doing well, but luckily we came off of some high elevation areas, and we came down into a valley where it allowed us to descend, a few hundred meters in elevation, and that little bit of descent actually helped him and made him feel a little bit better. He still was kind of slow, but it was kind of a crux point in the race for us as well, because after that we had to go back up high and traverse a ridge for about 10 kilometers before we got to the next checkpoint. And then after that 10 kilometers was over, we finally got to descend back into the jungle and into the valley, and we get to lower elevation. So ultimately we decided we had to push through. We were now into, I guess it was the 4th night of the race, and it also had started raining recently, and the wind had picked up, so it wasn't a pretty or fun situation, but Kyle was up for it, and we said, okay, let's give it a shot. So we trekked up onto these ridges, and these are the ridges that we were on. We were actually there in the night. It was really dark. Wind was howling. It was just a crazy experience. This was the next day. I think some cameramen went through with some teams. This is Team Merrill. So this just gives you an idea of kind of what we were on. This is the highest checkpoint that we reached in the race, up at 3,800 meters. So again, like I said, when we were up here, it was really foggy. It was completely dark, and it was really tricky finding our way off of these ridges. And this gives you an idea of kind of what the terrain was like. Yeah, just really harsh and cold. And it's kind of a shock for your body. You've been racing in this like really hot environment. To go up into the mountains and into this type of terrain was really, really different. And it can be hard on your body. Some teams didn't fare so well. They got up high. This was the Polish team, I think. They ended up dropping out because some of their teammates got hypothermic when they were up high on the mountain, and they couldn't get out or down to lower elevation and recover enough. So, yeah, it was serious up there. But then, you get through, if you can get through that high terrain in the mountains, you came down the other side, and this is kind of the jungle to give you an idea of what it looked like we were trekking through on the other side. So we came off those peaks, and we started kind of sliding back down into the valleys, and it was really muddy. You can see the jungle is really thick, and this was something that we were thinking about the whole time as well, is There was a trail that was going to lead us off this peak, but the last thing we wanted to end up doing was bushwhacking or having to bushwhack in this environment. It was just really awful looking terrain. And here's a map that kind of shows where we were. So this is when we got up high into the mountains. Kyle wasn't feeling very good, and this is that long ridgeline I was talking about that took us across to another hut. And then this is kind of descending out of the high mountains and back down into the valley. And this was a really, really remote part of the course as well. The people that live in this valley, they're actually about 20 to 30 kilometers hike away from the nearest road. So once you got in there, it was really remote. And we had the setback with Kyle, but things were still going okay for us. We were actually still in 4th place. Another team caught up to us at this hut here. So, 4th, 5th place. We probably lost about 3 or 4 hours on the leaders, but once we started dropping elevation, Kyle started feeling a lot better. And we actually got some good momentum going again. So our team started moving well again. And we were like, okay, we're still in this. And, we didn't know what was happening with the teams in front of us. So we kind of kept pushing through the Jungle Valley floor. Unfortunately, things didn't turn around for our team. We got into the valley here, and it showed on this slide here, it showed a nice trail kind of going down through the valley, but on the map it said that the trail's location was approximate. So we were like, oh, okay, well, there's probably going to be a pretty well-defined trail that goes through this valley. But that didn't end up being the case at all. We got down into the valley, and for us, we hit that leg in the dark. It would have been the 5th night of the race for us. And we really struggled to stay on that trail. At times it would peter out to the river, and then we would follow kind of gravel bars down the riverbed, and those gravel bars would peter out, and we'd follow the side of the river for a while, and then we really didn't want to be off trail at this time. We really wanted to be on those trails. But sometimes, we'd run into a gorge, and there'd just be big rapids going down the gorge, so we'd have to backtrack and try and find the trail again. And we kind of faced scenarios like that about 3 or 4 times through this night of the race. And each time it was costing us maybe an hour and a half before we could get back on track. And we knew it wasn't good, but the funny thing was teams weren't really catching us from behind, so we didn't really know what was going on. So we kind of kept pushing to get through to the end of the leg. And these are just kind of slides of what it looked like in that valley there. So sometimes we'd run into banana plantations, which was interesting. And then this is a team. This kind of shows you what the trails were like. They were pretty overgrown, and oftentimes there was trails kind of going in every direction, and you weren't really sure which one to get on. So it was really quite a tough leg. But this shows a interesting thing, and what I was talking about earlier at the start of the presentation with looking after your feet. So these teams are really looking after their feet. They're stopping to clean their feet, and we were doing this throughout this trek as well. When we got down into the valley, we would stop, and one of the things that I learned in Fiji was that you had to put some type of barrier on your foot. So whether it would be Vaseline or any kind of sports slick like Ryan was talking about he used in his race to prevent blisters. But if you had some type of barrier, that helped alleviate the jungle rot, and that actually worked well for our team. So we got to the end of that trek finally. It was, it took us 2 days to get through that 100 kilometers, a little bit longer than expected. Kind of halfway through the second night, we realized we were going to miss the dark zone that I talked about earlier on that rafting leg. So we were like, you know what, there's not enough time now. We're not going to get there. And so this is a medical check at the end of that trekking leg. They made each team stop here for an hour just to kind of see how you were doing and how everyone was going. And Kyle's getting what they called the iodine treatment to his blisters. So they actually pop the blister and inject it with iodine, which is an incredibly painful thing to have done. But it actually prevents the infection from happening later on. So he's getting treated here. But the other thing we didn't know is we didn't know what had happened to the 3 teams in front of us until we got to this point. And, we still thought in the back of our heads, it was really tough getting through that leg. Maybe they got caught up. But when we hit this spot in the race, we found out that those 3 teams that were ahead of us were 12 hours ahead now at this point. So they had just distanced themselves. They had a good stretch through there, and obviously all the difficulties we faced, they didn't face. So it kind of brought us back into 4th. Actually, the night before this, 3 other teams caught up to us. Adidas, a team from the United Kingdom, Quasar Launcher again, who we'd been racing with earlier, and then another team called BMS Multisport from Brazil. And kind of the 4 of us made our way through those trails together over the last night of the race. So effectively, those 3 teams that were ahead, they got through that dark zone and they did the rafting this day. And it left us kind of these other 4 teams, and we were now kind of almost racing for 4th place, because after that rafting leg, there was only about a day and a half of racing left. So there wasn't much we could do. We were still in the race. We wanted to still race as well as we could, and we were going to keep pushing. And one thing is interesting is when you hit these dark zones, you get all this sleep. And teams that have a lot of sleep, or if they bank sleep earlier in the race, they end up moving really fast through the last days of the race. So we kind of thought in the back of our heads, maybe if we prepare really well and we get a big sleep, we'll be able to push really hard. But we weren't too sure, because there was only about a day and a half of racing left after that. But yeah, this is us hiking out of the medical check there. A little dirty and tired. This is, I think, five and a half days into the race now. So after that trek, we actually had a small bike. There was about a 40-kilometer bike ride to get to that dark zone I had talked about before the rafting. And this is just some more great scenery in Costa Rica. We saw some beautiful countryside down there. It was really fantastic. So we got into not mid-camp, we hit the dark zone, and we actually arrived there kind of tied for 4th place with the Adidas team from the United Kingdom. And then over the course of that night, 2 other teams showed up. So the teams that we had been hiking with, I guess it was the night before, we actually hadn't seen them in about 24 hours, but they came in through that night. So 4 of us ended up at this dark zone. And then when we got going again in the morning, another team, Merrill from South Africa, showed up. And they were just coming in as kind of the 4 of us were leaving to go on the rafting leg. So for us, it was almost a restart of the race. All 4 teams were together, and we're rafting down a section of the course. This was more of a fun section for us than anything. The water and the raft kind of takes you down, and it was fun. It was some big gorges and some big water. There's some great pictures of some of the things we saw. 3 of us on our team got ejected out of the boat at one point while we were going down this leg, and I don't know if you saw on the last slide, but they actually gave us a guide for this section of the race. Sometimes they let you go unguided in the races, depending on the difficulty, but this was up to like Class 4 rapids, so they gave us a guide, which we were very thankful for. You rescued a few of us, so that was nice. But yeah, we got to the end of that rafting leg, and then kind of what we had left after that raft, there was a 90-kilometer kayak leg, and then a 20-kilometer trek, followed by 150 kilometers of biking. And that was what we had left in the race. And we kind of assumed it was going to take about a day and a half to get through all that. And the longest amount of time was going to be this kayak leg. The boats they had us paddling, they actually weren't that great. You saw them earlier. They were inflatable boats, and we could only average about 5-6 kilometers an hour in these boats. So they were just brutally slow. In a normal sea kayak, you might go 8-10 kilometers an hour. But in these things, we were limited to only 5-6 kilometers an hour. So it was pretty brutal. So kind of the 4 teams, we all started this kayak leg together. And what we were doing, I don't know if you remember the initial map, but we'd finally made it to the Atlantic coast at this point. So we'd paddled out a river, and that brought us to these, they're kind of intercoastal waterways. There were these little channels and rivers that were just behind the ocean. And every now and again, like when we'd pass a spot like this, we could see the waves breaking on the Atlantic Ocean. It was kind of neat, but it was also pretty tricky navigating through here. You can see there's a lot of little offshoots where you might end up going. So we had to pay special attention to that. And I think right around this area, we ended up in the dark. So again, it was really tough to keep track of the maps and concentrate. And we're so far into the race, sleep deprivation and trying to stay awake is also a big factor. And one of the things a lot of teams do is they'll end up just singing like group songs. When someone thinks of a song, you just sing all night long, and it keeps you awake and keeps you going. So that was fun. This is another thing we had to worry about on this leg: crocodiles. It was fun. Every now and again, we'd see little eyes glowing on the side of the river. And at first, we weren't sure what they were. We were like, oh, maybe it's like a raccoon or something like that. I don't know what that is. But a couple of times we got close to the shore, and sure enough, you saw it was a crocodile, and it would duck under the water. So they weren't very harmful. They were, I think, more afraid of us than we were of them. I think it's a lot like bears here in Ontario. You don't want to run into them, but if you do, generally they'll run away from you if you're in a group. And that's kind of what happened with these crocodiles. They didn't cause us too much trouble, but we saw quite a few eyes. So this gives you an idea of what it looked like paddling up those channels and in the estuaries there. Just hot, long, slow paddling. So this is a map of the end of that leg. So we paddled up this channel here. This is actually a little town called Tortuguera, and we had to visit this checkpoint up here, 42, before we came to 43, where we got out of the boats, and then we had a trek kind of around to 45 there. So we'd been paddling for such a long time. We pulled into this town. I thought, oh, this would be great. We'll just park our boats here and we'll run up the coast to get the checkpoint and come back. And at that point, actually, the tide was going out, so we would have had a fast ride up to the checkpoint, but it would have been pretty tough fighting it on the way back. So we opted to pull into town there and shake our legs out a little bit and run up to the checkpoint. And at that point, we were still with Adidas. Adidas had caught up to us on that paddle, and we hadn't seen BMS or Quasar Lantra for some time. So yeah, we jumped out. Adidas kept going. We weren't sure actually what happened to them. The town was bizarre. It was, like I said, it was a Caribbean kind of feeling town, and there was like music playing, and bars were hopping. It was probably around 11, 12 o'clock at night, and here's four stinky racers. We've been out in the middle of nowhere for days and days. It was really a surreal experience, and at one point, there was a young fellow that came up to us, and he was trying to at first we thought he was trying to help us out, and then he tried to sell us some drugs, and we were like, oh, no, that's okay. No thanks. After that, though, he offered to do our laundry for us, so we must have stunk or something. He actually did. He was like, oh, what about laundry? No thanks. We'll keep going. So so we ran up to the checkpoint, came back, got in our boats, and we started paddling in towards the transition area here. It was a little tricky finding the channels, but we got through it okay. So we got to the transition area, we got out, we're kind of getting ready to go, and we noticed one of our packs were missing. And we were like, what? You got to be kidding me. Like, there's not a pack. So we kind of went through everything really quickly and kind of crazily, and sure enough, Kyle's pack had fallen off the back of one of the boats. As we'd been paddling up these channels here, we were brushing against the sides of the jungle, whatever was there, and a branch must have caught his pack and pulled it right out of the boat. So Kyle and I jumped back in the boat, and we were paddling like mad. We had no idea how far back up the channel it might be. And on our way up there, we actually ran into Team BMS was paddling back in, and they actually let us know that they'd seen it not too far back up the river there. So we ripped back up there, got the pack. Luckily, got it back, so thank God. But we wasted probably about an hour messing around there. But then we got going again on this trek. So I guess we're into the sixth night of the race, and we had a decent amount of sleep at that dark zone the night before, but we were still hurting pretty bad through this trek. And a few kilometers in, we were all falling asleep, and we weren't moving very well. So we were like, okay, we're going to have to stop and sleep. And, this will be our last sleep before the end of the race. So we'll take an hour power nap, and then we'll get going again. And as we stopped and set up, we noticed Adidas and BMS passed us in the dark. And unfortunately, the sleep didn't end up being too good either. There was a lot of mosquitoes in that area. So we kind of laid down for a bit, slept off and on, and then we got up and got going again. So anyways, we're kind of continuing on through the night, and we get to checkpoint 44, and this was the first time we'd seen race staff since the start of this kayak leg. A lot of these checkpoints are just like orienteering flags hanging at the checkpoints. And the race staff told us that Team Seagate, one of the teams that had been ahead of us, like over a day ahead of us now, had dropped out of the race. Their feet had gotten so bad, they ended up getting that jungle rot that I had talked about earlier, that when they got to Tortuguera, one of their teammates was in so much pain they had to stop and try and treat his feet and make him well enough to continue. But I think it had gotten to a point where it was so bad and he just couldn't recover. They ended up dropping out of the race, and they got a boat ride to the kind of out of the township there, and they got driven kind of into the finish. So ended up having to drop out of the race, which was really surprising for all of us on the team. We couldn't believe it because, Seagate was such a strong team, and they're a very consistent team as well. So you never want to hear about teams dropping out, but this also, for us, meant that we were racing for the final podium spot. So, there was us, Adidas, and BMS all really close, and we had to get to this transition area here for the final 150K bike ride to the finish. So this was us on that trek trying to get through it. It was still stinking hot in the middle of the night. And this actually wasn't Team Seagate's feet. but this was a member of Team Bones. They actually came 10th place. This team finished the race, so this guy finished the race on feet looking like that. Sorry for the nasty picture, but it kind of shows you what that jungle rot can do. It's just, it's like a fungus. It's almost like an athlete's foot thing, but it just kind of attacks your foot, and it just spreads until you either treat it with antiseptic, or it really needs to get into a dry environment to dry out is what actually helps it heal itself. So this is us kind of hiking our way into the TA, and this is us in that TA with Adidas. So we got there and Adidas was still there. BMS had disappeared. We're not sure what happened to them. We figure they must have taken some sleep themselves. We weren't sure what happened. So this is us getting ready to go for that final 150K bike ride. It was a tough ride. It was super hot that day. Again, the heat was scorching. We were down low in elevation, and we were kind of riding through a lot of banana plantations. So Adidas got out of that checkpoint about a half hour before us, but probably it wasn't more than an hour or two into the ride when we caught up to them. And when we caught up to them, they weren't looking too enthused. And it wasn't so much the fact that we had caught up to them, but it was the fact that Nick had broken his bike. His rear derailleur had kind of exploded. He must have picked up a stick or something. And they were really struggling to kind of maintain forward momentum. So we stopped briefly, kind of see if we could help. Teams are very helpful with one another on the course, but we had a spare derailleur, but it was kind of back in the transition area, and that was kind of the best we could offer them. But we kind of had to push on because we didn't know where the other teams were. So we kept going through this ride. Again, it was really hot. It was probably, it was 6-7 hours before we got to this point in the race. This is checkpoint 48. This is the second last checkpoint in the race. And this checkpoint actually caused a lot of trouble for a lot of teams. So when you came down the roadway here, there was a turnoff, as you can see, kind of right here. And it actually was a lot harder to spot than the map would indicate. Kind of the previous section of this race, it was, reasonably easy to follow the roads. Nothing was too tricky. But when we got to this spot, we actually passed this turnoff, and we rode a little bit further up here. And when, at that point, I knew we'd gone past that corner, so we rode back to check it out. And all it was like a driveway almost. It was gated off with some cattle fencing, and we were like, wow, this is kind of where we are. This is where it should be. So let's go check it out. So we, went through the gate, and we started going through the fields there, and it just didn't feel right. It was like, we were riding on, kind of like single track through farmers' fields, and it was really strange. So we kind of climbed up onto a ridge to look around, and we knew the general direction that we had to go, but we weren't sure kind of what was going on. So we were poking around in there for about 15 minutes, and then kind of right at that time, we started hearing these English accents in the distance, and we were like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And sure enough, it was Team Adidas from the UK had caught up to us. And we hadn't seen them for probably 6-7 hours, and we're getting really close to the finish of the race here, and our hearts were just like, oh no, you gotta be kidding me. So we kind of put the hammer down, and there was another little stretch of trail that we hadn't checked out, so we figured, oh, this must be the way, we'll try it out. And we kind of rode down. You can see there's a river here, and that's where the checkpoint was. It was actually on a bridge over the river was the description of the checkpoint. So we rode down into this area here, and the bearing was good that we were following. But we ended up, the trail ended up just dying kind of right near the river, and there was no bridge, and we were like, oh, this isn't good. So we backtracked a little bit, and as we backtracked that 200-300 meters, Adidas showed up, and we kind of all saw each other, and we were like, oh, geez. And they were like, oh, did you find the checkpoint? And we were like, no, we don't know where it is. And we were kind of standing there because at that point, I actually had noticed there's little houses there, and I was kind of using those houses to try and figure out where the checkpoint was. So at that point, I had a general idea of where it might be, but we didn't want to kind of tip them off to where it was. We were kind of playing this game of cat and mouse. But unfortunately, their navigator, Tom, he's pretty good. He told me after the race, because when he caught up to us, he went a little bit of a different direction than we went. And I was like, Tom, well, how'd you know which way to go there? And he was like, oh, I just saw some trampled down grass. The teams ahead probably had trampled it down. And he thought that was the way to go, because when we ran into him, he kind of went right to where the checkpoint was and where I thought it was going to be. So he went in there, and it was really hard to find, actually. It wasn't really a bridge at all. It was these two old logs that were across the river, and they were like 30 feet over the river, but it was really thick, a jungle kind of next to the river in there, and you could actually walk right past the logs and not even see them, is kind of the scenario was in. So when he first went in there, he saw the checkpoint because you could see it hanging on the other side of the bridge. But then he kept going kind of to not tip us off. So again, we were playing this like cat and mouse game, and it was really kind of funny. But ultimately, I kind of fessed up because I saw the checkpoint, and I was like, okay, we know where the checkpoint is. And Tom's like, oh, yeah, I saw it too. And it was kind of a strange situation because we were only like 10 kilometers from the finish of the race, and I think both teams were kind of done with the racing aspect, and we just kind of wanted it to be over. And it was actually kind of nice that it was Team Adidas. I actually know the guys on the team quite well, and we'd been racing against each other for years. So we talked it over, and we thought, a good thing to do would be to finish together. So we decided to all kind of team up and ride in together to the end of the race. So that's what we did. But so the race wasn't totally over, so we rode that last 10, 12K together, but we still had to do another canopy tour and a little rafting section. So we got to the canopy tour, and when we got there, we actually found out some pretty amazing news. The second place team, Columbia, had only been there 4 hours ahead of us. So over the last day and a half of racing, we'd made up with something like 14 hours on them. So they must have really been struggling with the sleep deprivation. I think those top three teams were really pushing each other with the sleep and trying to maintain. And then here's actually Team Thule, who ended up winning the race. This was them earlier that day getting paddled to the finish line. So they finished the canopy tour, and this is the four of them sleeping in the boat, and they're letting their guide paddle them down the river. Yeah. So, yeah, they got by the skin of their teeth. Apparently, they'd only taken 8 hours over the course of the 7 days of racing, which was astonishing to me that they could get by on so little sleep. I mean, we didn't think we were sleeping that much, and we got about 17 hours over the course of the race. But they actually got quite lucky. This is one of their teammates on the left, Jackie. He really struggled with the sleep deprivation late in the race, and I think they had quite a bit bigger lead, and they were only maybe 20 kilometers from the finish, and they actually had to stop and sleep a number of times so that he could recover enough. Apparently he got quite incoherent at times just from the sleep deprivation, but they obviously played their cards just perfectly because they were able to sneak in and get the win. So this is Team Thule winning the race. They're a multinational team, actually. The fellow on the right's from New Zealand, and then two in the middle are from France, and then the other guy was from Spain. So they ended up winning the race, and it was about 7 days it took them to finish. And then here we are later that evening, us with Team Adidas finishing, and we tied for third and fourth place. So that was how we finished in the race. So thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to the show. So I guess it's question time. Does anyone have some questions? How are we doing? You want to take over, Pete?
Yeah. Okay. So I've been told that, we need the mic for the online people, and so everyone can hear the question. So if you have a question, just flag me down. I'll come give you the mic, and we'll go from there. All right? Not all at once. All right. There we go.
I'm asking this question on behalf of someone else. He had to leave, but apparently it's a funny story. He wanted me to ask you to tell us about, in implicit detail, the month that you spent sitting on a donut. That's Sean Ruppel.
Okay. Next question. We won't get into the details of that one. That was a race I did in, it was in Western Canada, and I got an infection where you don't want an infection. Thanks.
Bob, you said you did the navigating. How did you divide the responsibilities amongst the four of you?
Good question. So the way we actually discussed this before the race and how we would handle the maps and preparing them. So we were getting the maps. We got them in actually 3 clumps kind of throughout the race course. And usually that would be in a transition area. So instead of me going and maybe building my bike or, getting new food for my pack, repacking and unpacking, I would actually just go straight to the maps and work on, preparing them for the next legs of the race. In this race, we also had, usually teams have a lead navigator and then they'll have a backup navigator. So if it ever came down to it where I was maybe struggling or I needed some help, I would call on Kyle. He was kind of our backup navigator. But Karen was actually very helpful with navigation as well. She had an uncanny ability to sense when I was maybe uncertain about things. And I think she just has so much experience doing these races that she knows kind of when things aren't going well. And she actually would, and she's great because she would speak up and be like, Bob, are you 100%? You know, are we going the right way? And numerous times when we were racing this year, she stopped us from making navigation mistakes just because of that ability. So it was kind of cool. But I actually navigated the whole race as how we ended up with this one. It seemed to go all right for us, except for that nasty valley. Yeah.
So the only thing you use then is a compass, that's it?
Yeah, so the question was if all we used was a compass, and that's right. So we use the compass. We use an altimeter as well. We're not allowed to use GPSs. That's kind of forbidden in the races. So yeah, map, compass, and your altimeter is all you use to get through the race course. Yeah.
In a race that long, how do you navigate water? Because you're not, in the 24-hour you can get by, but what if...
For water?
Yeah, how did you...
We drink the water out of the streams. We treat it. Yeah, we fill it up all over the place. When you get high up into the mountains and you're above kind of any of the villages, the water is pretty clean. But we didn't take any chances, and we would treat all the water we came across. But we also would stop in. There was a lot of little villages, and generally the water in Costa Rica is they tell us it's good to drink if you get it out of a village or out of a tap. So sometimes we risked it, and sometimes we treated it. Most of the time we treated it. So yeah. But it was definitely part of our strategy too. Like before that big mangrove paddle, we found a river. Like we kind of marked it on the map. Like this is where we're going to fill up with water, and we filled up 30 liters of water or something like that. So yeah, we were kind of. You always think about that as you're going through the race course. Yeah.
Hey, you had mentioned the guide for the whitewater section. In the expedition races, is it common to always have a guide? And how much whitewater experience do you have to have for expedition races?
I think usually if you're above Class 3 whitewater, they'll include a guide. So if it gets into Class 4 or Class 5, especially rafting, but in the World Championships the year before in France, we were doing Class 3 and 4 rafting, and they didn't give us a guide. You kind of had to do it on your own, and that created some drama for sure for a lot of the teams. At the beginning of the race, I was talking about the gear checks and the safety checks. Some races, they required you to have ability certificates, so you would have had to have passed a course that showed you could, guide a raft through this type of whitewater and different things like that. So, yeah, it just depends. But generally, up to Class 2 or 3, they'll let you do on your own, and then over that, they usually give you a guide. So, yeah, it was great in this race. It was nice. Yeah, I know.
Of these races?
Entry fees for the races, I think the World Championships, the entry fee was about $8,000 per team. For the World Series races, they can range anywhere from $4,000 to say $6,000, so about $1,000 each. And then you have to travel there yourself. That's right, you have to pay for the flights and the gear, and it's endless. Yeah, it can be quite expensive. I think there was a $75,000 prize pool at this race, so we ended up splitting third and fourth place. We got $11,000 each per team that we would split amongst ourselves. So, I think. Well, we were on a sponsored team, so they helped cover some of our entry fee. They covered our entry fee and our flights, so there's still some money that we were spending definitely to get to the race. But if you were doing a race out of pocket, I would expect to spend anywhere from like $2,000 to $3,000. So kind of like an expensive all-inclusive vacation type of fee. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what would you suggest for someone who would be interested? I'm a fitness trainer, and I have a lot of people that like to do a lot of different events and, train for marathons and things like that. So if someone was interested in doing something like this, what steps would you suggest that they take to do that?
I mean, when I got started in this type of racing, it was just I found some friends and we entered some of the local races around here. So adventure racing spans a whole spectrum of distances and difficulties. So there's entry-level races you can do, and that's how I got started doing races in Ontario. They'd last anywhere from like 3 to 8 hours were kind of the entry-level races, and then after that, you kind of step up to 12 to 24-hour races, and then you can get into the expedition stuff. And that was kind of the exact progression that I took. A big thing, obviously, is the navigation with the races. So we offer, I run some races actually in Ontario, and we offer navigation clinics and things like that. So one of the races that I organized, Ryan had participated in Wilderness Traverse. You can go to the website there, and there's information on navigation clinics there, so it's wildernesstraverse.com. You can find details. So yeah, but really it's just find some friends and then sign up, and there's nothing. The best experience is to try a race, and you'll learn so much more just doing a race than you will training and preparing. I mean, you want to train and prepare as much as you can, but you're going to have fun no matter what. So that's one of the things I really like about the sport, is the fact that you're there with your friends and your teammates, and you get to enjoy an endurance sport, which is often a solo activity with other people. So it's one of the neat things about adventure racing.
You mentioned singing, but what are the other strategies to keep up morale and deal with conflict during the long races?
Yeah, probably one of the hardest things in racing is staying focused and keeping morale up, and kind of that continuous movement, as you can imagine when you're going for that many days. I don't know that we have so many strategies. I mean, definitely for staying awake, we'll take caffeine pills is kind of the strongest thing that we'll take to try and stay awake. It's the equivalent of maybe drinking a cup of coffee, and that seems to help a little bit. But yeah, when you get really tired, there's almost nothing you can do. Your body just wants to sleep at some points, and that's actually my least favorite part of these types of races, is that sleep deprivation. And it's funny, it's something that hits you in some races and it doesn't in others. So I'll have some races where I can go the whole race and I won't be feeling tired or sleepy or like I'm going to fall asleep. But then I'll have other races, and the first night I'll be falling asleep by like midnight, and I have no idea why. But it's really hard. And then as far as morale goes, racing kind of at the level that we're racing at, everyone knows that they're going to be pushing and going for that length of time, and there's almost it's just like an unwritten, not really an unwritten rule, but we just know, in our minds that we've agreed to push a certain amount, and we're going to try and get through it. But you definitely lean on your teammates. I mean, I don't think anyone doing these races would get through the whole course by themselves. Your teammates help you out for sure. There's definitely going to be times when you're feeling off and they'll help you out, and then there's also going to be times where you have to help them out. So a big part of the racing is not having an ego, and it's sometimes as hard to accept help as it is to give it. So that's a big part of it for sure. Yeah. Great. Oh, one more question.
Who plans the courses for these races, and is it the same group of people that plans them all around the world? And had somebody already gone through and done that, everything before you guys did it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's event directors. Like I was saying, I organize a 24-hour race here ahead of time, and it's an incredible undertaking to organize one of the races. I mean, you have to get permission from all the landowners. On top of that, you have to plan what you think is a safe route. We get updates before the race that explain the disciplines and what we're going to be doing, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to design a race course and, provide a race course that matches what you've advertised. So it's a really difficult thing. But yeah, there's usually teams of about 4 or 5 people, and they'll go and set the course. They'll test it all ahead of time. The organizers of this event, there was one Costa Rican fellow and another fellow from Spain that set up this race course. And they'd been doing it for a number of years. The one guy from Spain, Antonio, he's been setting courses for probably 10 years or something like that. So yeah, it's a huge undertaking. It's amazing. There's a lot of tourism support, obviously, and this race it was actually filmed by a crew out of Australia. I don't know that we'll get to see it in Canada, but something I did want to mention is there was a team racing here from Canada that was it was a media team, and they were being filmed for a series called Boundless TV. I don't know if you guys have seen Boundless. So the two guys, Turbo and Simon. So in June, we'll get to see what happens to them in the race on TV in Canada. So maybe Joel will probably have something on the website about when that comes up. So, yeah. Okay, great. I think we're done. Thanks, guys. Yeah.